And it's a storm literally brewing around one of Kenya's most scenic national parks, the AMBOSELI. Now, conservation groups are up in arms over what they proposed horticultural farm that they say will disrupt the park's wildlife dispersal area. Now, proprietors of the farm, however, insist that the project has the potential of uplifting livelihoods in the area. Our very own Dorcas Wangira now reports on the acrimony that has once again pitted conservation against other forms of land use. Take a look.
We're flying over the corridor, and just there is parkland.
The condition now is that this is a land within the conservation area, but it's a free holder land. My neighbor have agreed to do conservation, but for us, we are saying no.
Now the communities are subdividing, and in the process of subdivision, then people sell land, and then in the process of selling land, then new investors come.
The choice between shall I develop or shall I conserve nature is a forced choice. We need to do both.
The AMBOSELI is a Maasai word which loosely translates to salty dust. It is a relatively flat landscape, a collage of woodlands and savanna. Wetlands with sulfur springs. It is one of the open spaces where herds of elephant roam free against the backdrop of Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest peak. It employs almost 1,200 people, earning an estimated 1.3 billion shillings in the year 2018-2019. It also funds other national parks in the country. But for all its splendor, the national park, covering 39,206 hectares or 392 square kilometers, our protected area is not big enough to survive on its own.
Wanyama hawezi ishi huko. Huwa wanyama wanatumia AMBOSELI kama ni mahali ya kunywa maji tu, alafu wanarudi ndani ya hii kichaka.
In the dry season, some species remain in the park, but come the wet season, elephants in particular look yonder and migrate to pastures on community-owned land outside the park. The Park Beyond Parks and Benefits Beyond Boundaries concept is idealized by group ranches and 6 wildlife conservancies in the AMBOSELI Ecosystem Biosphere Reserve.
We're standing outside the Kimana Gate, a core zone. Then there's the buffer zone and the transition zone, where animals will disperse and migrate into other ecosystems. However, land subdivision outside the park is becoming a big challenge to conservation efforts.
You now start getting proposal developments of big farms. Businessmen in Nairobi, they come to this area. They see potential of the landscape and they think they can do anything they want.
Land and livelihood is the crux of this matter. A proposed agricultural development, a 180-acre horticultural farm owned by Kiliavo Fresh Limited, is ongoing in part of the subdivided Kimana Group Ranch, nestled within the Olopolos Conservancy. The proposed integrated mixed-used farm development is on plot at LR number Loitoktok Kimana Tikondo 4209, 4210 and 4211 in Kajiado County. We meet Jeremiah Swaka Salash, a resident of Kimana and one of the shareholders of the limited company.
Look at this landscape and see the bushland that has been left untouched for many years. You may mistake it for an area that has been set aside for wildlife. However, this land is owned by individuals who have freehold titles.
After we bought this land, we follow the due process. As we know that there's NEMA, there's WARMA. Agriculture, it creates a big chain of employment. Everybody is looking for an income, how to get the daily bread.
Kiliavo submitted an environmental impact assessment EIA for the proposed development on the 24th October 2019. The AMBOSELI Ecosystem Trust AAT Plan Implementation Committee PIC objected to the development, and an objection letter was issued by AAT on the 23rd December 2019. There were no conditions to be met to reverse the decision. After the initial objection, there was no further consultation of any local stakeholders, including the PIC. In July 2020, the AAT Secretariat issued a new letter of no objection to the development. The majority members of the AAT PIC, ALOCA, and other local landowners remain strongly opposed to the development. On 6th August 2020, the National Environmental Management Authority, NEMA, issued an Environmental Impact Assessment Project Approval License number 0068059 to Harji Mavji and Suresh Kurjikerai, a green light to continue with the proposed development. The land clearing machines arrived in early August 2020. By the beginning of September, almost 174 acres of natural vegetation had been cleared, and at least 120 acres had already been ploughed. The farm is expected to produce fruits such as avocados and vegetables, onions, tomatoes and garlic, both for export and local consumption, and to be irrigated by groundwater from 2 boreholes.
All that flat land over there is AMBOSELI.
The Kiliavo proposed development isn't the only farm within the conservancies. The Ngong Veg Farm in Olarami has more acreage and has been thriving within the ecosystem for 2 years. Other agricultural developments in the wildlife corridor, Aloka says, have been pushed through despite significant environmental damage and local resistance.
The route which the elephant were used to were blocked. So you find them starting passing some other areas. The consequences are human-wildlife conflict.
One of the reasons the farm is being opposed is because it does not align to the AMBOSELI Ecosystem Management Plan. According to the AAT Management Plan, 120 acres of the development falls within the Wildlife Conservation and Tourism Zone, and the other 60 acres fall within the Livestock Grazing and Conservation Zone. Neither of these zones allow for arable agricultural development.
They told us we have to stop this work because you are at the wrong place. We told them we are sorry, can you give us the document showing this is a conservation area or any document showing this land does not belong to us? And they do not have those.
Ombi letu tunataka kuambia waachane na mambo ya kilimo. Kimana Wildlife Sanctuary and the Amboseli National Park is this corridor. And if this corridor is interfered, you find both Kimana Sanctuary and Amboseli National Park will have some negative impact in the future.
This map below with data provided by Save the Elephants and AMBOSELI Trust for Elephants follows the movement of 2 collared elephants. Relying on data provided by their tracks, it is representative of an estimated 200 elephants who actively use and rely upon this corridor and often pass exactly through the proposed development site. One of the observed elephants is named Lenku after the Kajiado governor.
If the corridors are blocked, there's no future for the elephant, I can assure you.
Aloka's biggest fear is that if NEMA's decision to allow continued development is allowed to hold, it will set another terrible precedent for an irreversible agricultural land rush.
My plea to the government is to come and intervene, because you find the stakeholders who are trying and the government had been silent.
A wildlife corridor, in essence, is an area of habitat connecting wildlife populations separated by human activities or structures such as roads, development or logging. It allows migratory animals to move from one area to another. Migration and movement, just like for human beings, is a primal instinct for wild animals. Kiliavo Limited maintains that its farm does not lie in a conservation area. However, they have plans to support wildlife conservation.
We are doing not to say we are going to chase these wild animals to go far away. We can make it just like a small corridor for those animals to come and get water, and they can pass by.
In addition, there are plans to put up an electric fence to protect the crops and have the animals go around the farm. Fencing is a strategy that is being used by Big Life Foundation to mitigate human-wildlife conflict in areas designated for farming. A 107-kilometer fence runs straight from the Kitenden border between Kenya and Tanzania, another important corridor that connects the AMBOSELI elephants to the Mount Kilimanjaro National Park and then diverges. However, in other non-designated wildlife and livestock zones, fencing may be a big challenge.
When you fence, you are only trying to safeguard one element, which is human-wildlife conflict. But in terms of taking space, in terms of the area being utilized by wildlife, is no longer going to be there.
On 14th September, a PIC meeting was held at the AMBOSELI National Park, Kimana Gate. This included members from ALOCA, AEC, the Big Life Foundation, the Kenya Wildlife Service, AFAO, ACC, as well as the landowners of the proposed farm developments. It was preceded by other deliberations in Nairobi to unlock the stalemate.
Land uses, different land uses clustered together just to reduce the conflict. We've gone ahead to make sure that every land use has some restriction.
The proposed development could continue as planned, even though the process of awarding the NEMA license is being challenged. The other option is if the landowner chooses to forfeit their land and get compensation commensurate to their investment of tens of millions of shillings.
It's not right. It's my choice to agree or disagree.
18 September 2020, NEMA issued a letter to Harji Mavji and Suresh Kirai. It reads, and I quote, "Consequently, concerns have been raised on the suitability of the proposed project within the AMBOSELI ecosystem, citing that the proposed activity is within a wildlife corridor and contravenes the gazetted AMBOSELI ecosystem management plan, and that key stakeholders were not consulted during the EIA approval process. Noting this new development, the authority invoked the provision of Section 64(1)(b) of the Environment Management and Coordination Act to direct the holder of an EIA license to submit at his own expense a fresh EIA study. Enshrined in Vision 2030 is ensuring the conservation of wildlife for future generations through the identification and protection of key wildlife habitats and the corridors and the dispersal areas on which they depend. A robust conservation connectivity framework, CCF, is what will manage an all-wildlife habitat within an increasingly human-dominated landscape. A critical wildlife corridor should be gazetted, but Kajiado County's situation is unique. Largely inhabited by Maasai pastoralists, most of its land is registered under group ranches. From as early as 2005, group ranch members feared that with a new constitutional dispensation, their land would become community land as proposed. They agreed to subdivide it.
The corridor report was launched, I think, 1 or 2 years ago. People were allocated land individually, freehold titles, people not knowing the importance of the corridor then.
The conservancies have employed rangers and scouts. They provide pasture for livestock and earn revenue from wildlife tourism.
So watu wakianza kulima, hawa rangers watapoteza kazi na vitu mingi itaribika. Unajua pia tunapata mapato kutoka kwa wanyama.
But convincing landowners not to sell their land and lease it for conservation is a matter of economics, especially at a time of a pandemic.
And because of conservation, if you find a 60 hectares of land per year, you are being paid around 40,000. If you compare farming, which you can say for those who does not want to sell but they lease, 1 acre of land is go for around 30,000. So you can multiply that times 60. You see, it's a big difference.
The developers are given 10 days to show cause why the EIA project approval should not be revoked. This lapsed 28 September. In the meantime, they were instructed to stop any further activities on the proposed site. Should they find themselves aggrieved, they have the right to appeal to the National Environmental Tribunal for redress.
The project is stopped now. There have already been a lot of distraction. I think the grass can generate again soon when it gets rain. You know that one will take time.
Make a call to the government that they consider this is an important connectivity corridor so that then government can employ machinery, resources, compensation to help secure that area. If all those measures are going to delay, chances are that the corridor will begin to close slowly by slowly.
In this situation, is a win-win outcome possible for both wildlife and agricultural development? A critical conservation conversation is necessary in this country.
People who argue for only economics are missing the point. The people who argue only for nature conservation are missing the point. And so what we need is both going together.
What happens if NEMA decides to revoke the license given?
There's a process of revoking. And after, just only NEMA is an independent body. It cannot just wake up and say, okay, I am going to revoke.
The way forward is hinged on NEMA's final decision and the landowner's next course of action. Moreover, the ground in Kenya is shifting in matters conservation, as more communities realize that conservation isn't just about wildlife, but also our land, heritage, culture, and beliefs. Conservation is about us. Dorcas Wangira, Citizen TV, the Amboseli ecosystem, Kajiado.